sticks, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the
Welcome to The Politics Guys. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I'm joined by Justin Holmes, a professor of political science at the University of Northern Iowa. Justin, welcome to the Midweek Supporter Exclusive Show.
I feel exclusive. It's good to be here.
Aren't we exclusive, though? We are. I mean, who can top our style, our fashion, or our social science insight? And you get all of that and more for just $1 on this show. Now, so what we've been doing on the midweek shows for the two of us, we've got different mini-series going on, listeners. Ken and myself have been doing the Federalist Papers. We're going to be back with that. Justin and I, although we've been away a little bit, he and I have been doing political ideologies for you, and we've been kind of going through them in the same way that I teach them. And so that brings us this week to coming in to nationalism. This is, I think, a really important one, Justin, because I think more people are nationalists than they realize, especially on the right, although some on the left as well. But it's also kind of a difficult one because that word, like, oh, there's a nation, there's nationalism. We think we know what we're talking about until we really start trying to define. And you're an empirical guy, so you know.
I feel like with a lot of these, it's really straightforward until you start talking, and then it's not.
Yeah, well, it is. I always tell students, you think you know what words mean until you have to really define them. And especially that can get tough. So I start just for listeners, just to understand why is nationalism a difficult concept, both ideologically or empirically hard. There's this author, Hugh Seton Watson. He writes this really important work, Nations and States. And I love this introduction just for anything you're trying to study. He says this, thus, I am driven to the conclusion that no quote unquote scientific definition of the nation can be devised. Yet the phenomenon has existed and exists. Isn't that like just a great, it's like, here it is.
It's such
I don't
a
know if
philosophical
here's
answer.
It exists. Don't ask me to measure it, but it's out there. It's out there somewhere. It's there right now.
This feels like Potter Stewart all over again.
So to understand nationalism as an ideology, we'll have to think a little bit about the empirical side of, what is a nation or, a national identity. So one thing to note is that nations are socially constructed. So it is this idea of who we are, who's on the in and who's on the out. And it can be weird sometimes when you're just looking at it empirically to try to kind of figure it out. So for example, Justin, right, in 1947, you get Pakistan seceding from India, and the centerpiece of that is religion, right? You have Muslims, you have Hindus, and they get othered from one another. I mean, there's more to that story, but a big part of that identity there. But now you look up to our neighbors to the north, Canada and Quebec. Quebec has argued since the 1960s that they are ultimately unique from the rest of Canada. Why? Well, primarily because of just a linguistic difference in terms of French versus English. As a matter of fact, in 1995, Quebec falls just shy of 1% of the vote from becoming another independent state. So,
and now Alberta is toying with this as well.
Yes, it is. And so when you look at that and you say, and somebody says, okay, so what's a national identity? And you go, well, is it religion? Yes, but no. Is it language? Yes, but no. Is it, and so what I kind of try to help as we're thinking about this is I think there's kind of three common elements that I take students through. This idea that there is a sense of similarity, a feeling of community, and then ultimately a desire to be politically separate because of those other categories that then ends up pushing you to nationalism. Or as Benedict Anderson puts it, he says that a nation is an imagined community. Yep. And imagined is both inherently limited and sovereign. And so the way I get at this, I don't know how you do it with students potentially, Justin, but like I'll say, okay, how many of you do you know somebody from Alaska or from Minnesota? Pick a small populated state. And every now and then you'll have
Iowa,
like one person. Yeah. You ought to give Iowa a try.
I always pick on Wyoming, and then somebody got mad at me because like they knew somebody in Wyoming, and we're like, why are you always picking on Wyoming?
Well, it's because nobody lives there. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
But so the likelihood that, like you said, you knew one student one time is the one that's so, and I say, well, are they American? And inevitably you kind of get these funny response, like, well, of course, you weird leftist liberal professor, how could they not be American? Of course they're American. It's like apple pie. They're Alaskans, they're with, but then I say, okay. And so you don't mind them like vote, even though you don't know any of those people. You don't mind them deciding what happens in our country? Of course not, because they're Americans, right? And so then you say something to the effect of, okay, well, what about somebody from Quebec or somebody from Alberta, somebody from Canada in general? Just pick a different country. And suddenly, well, they couldn't vote with me because they don't understand me. I said, well, you don't know them any more than you know the guy from Alaska.
Right.
The guy from Alaska he's geographically far closer to the Canadians than he is to you, right? But that idea is that we recognize in our head that there's this edge to it, even if we can't touch it, but it's the edge that really kind of matters. What do you do with that, Justin? Or how do you think about that?
So yeah, I come at it largely from that way. And I also kind of couch it in sort of the definition of a nation state, the idea that it is a territory that has a single government that is filled with people that somehow see themselves connected to each other, to be vague about it, which so you've done a better job of kind of unpacking the, what does it mean to be
I'll take that.
who, but that holds something in common, so it's kind of one people, one place, one people, one government. And then I kind of problematize it right away that, that the first two are pretty easy, the physical territory and the one government, we know that, but the kind of who counts is complicated, so I'll always say, well, this nation state idea, I mean, it's not even a political science idea in some ways. It's kind of intuitive. We think of, okay, there's a place called France and it's got French people and it's governed by the French government. And there's a place called Uganda and you've never thought of it, but it's full of Ugandans and it's governed by the government of Uganda. And there's Norway and same deal, and Sweden, and they're different from Norwegian somehow, and, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Don't tell them that there's not a difference, but
well, it's kind of like Catalonia inside of Spain, right?
Yeah, or the Navajo Nation, or what have you. So but then the more complicated story becomes, the hard part is, what does it mean to be one people? And so I use that kind of the Benedict Anderson, example, and said it with you, because that's a great, it's a great concept. To be clear, imagined, not imaginary. I think that's something I always have to clarify for my.
I love the way you put
I
that.
always clarify that for my students. It's not that it's made up, but it's that it's a mental state. It is it's an identity, a belief, et cetera. But as I point out, this is a whole lot more complicated. If you look at kind of world history, this is much more complicated than that story that I just told you, where, here's America and it's full of Americans. In fact, I don't start there. Here's France, it's full of French people. Here's England, it's full of English people. But then there was that whole like Norman invasion thing. And where do the Celts fit in? And, then talking about borders. I even kind of talk about my own family story, before my grandma died, it was a long time before she died, but she talked about where her father was from. And she named a village, which we could never find until a couple of years ago, now that everything's on the internet. And I'll be damned if, our German family isn't from a village that's now in Poland. However, ethnically, we were German. And so I point out, thinking about kind of the way that these have shifted, we think about, okay, well, how have the borders moved? Sometimes there's a separate Poland, sometimes there's not, sometimes there's Germany separate from Austria, sometimes there's not, and so on. And this is a whole lot messier in practice than it is in theory, to say. So, then I take it back to kind of, again, that Benedict Anderson thing, which is, I think what really is important is that these people think that they are together. They imagine themselves together. So, the English don't really draw distinctions because you couldn't at this point, were you an Anglo-Saxon, or, how much Viking is in you involuntarily. And, And I think that's kind of where I leave it, typically. And because I'm mostly doing kind of American politics, I use that then as a kind of a bridge into some immigration stuff and culture and immigration and things. Because then the American story is more complicated a little bit because, not only is it, this is Germany and it's full of Germans, but this is Iowa and it's full of Germans and Norwegians. And, this is Minnesota and it's full of Germans and Swedes, and that's somehow different. And, these are the Scots-Irish down here. And yet we're all Americans, somehow. So,
Yeah.
It decouples that ethnicity idea a little bit. But even the concept of ethnicity, and this is further down the rabbit hole, I mean, that even is complicated. It's,
Oh, yeah.
these categories are much, I think oftentimes, God, I love the Potter Stewart, I know it when I see an obscenity thing, I apply that to so many
Yeah,
things.
of course.
It's, we know this when we see it. We know, well, that's an American, that's a Swede, that's a Senegalese or whatever. But I think it is much more complicated. And I think in the American context, it's especially messier.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just a couple weeks, a week and a half out from the Super Bowl, as you were kind of rattling off, well, is this person an American? Is this person an American? What about
Puerto
Bad
Rico.
Bunny?
Yeah. What about Puerto Rico?
Yes, he is.
Well,
but no, he's not.
And I think the thing that can be difficult to understand that makes, like you were bringing up ethnic identity, the reason we have this idea of nationalism apart from ethnic identity is the same reason that we have nationalism as opposed to like me being a runner, because a nationalism is this idea that whatever those variable mixes are, and they can the stews vary based on where you are, is that, as Adid Dawisha pushed it, he was actually a former professor of mine, that it's your desire to achieve political sovereignty that starts to make that desire for that one state that you're talking about there, that makes it different, right? So because I'm a runner, I don't think that bikers can't be a part of my political community, or I'm a triker now, and so I don't think that bikers can't be a part of. Instead, but there might be something so different about somebody else that they can't quite get there. And I want to explore that a little bit. But before we do that, I'm actually going to have to pause this for just a minute, because that comes to the end of our ad-supported preview of the midweek shows, supporters exclusive midweek show. So if you want to get the rest of this show or our other shows without any kinds of ads, we would love for you to become a supporter. Just head down to the show notes right now and unlock the entirety of this show and all of the previous Ideology shows that Justin and I have done, all of the previous Federalist Paper shows that I've done with Ken, and so much more. Mike's got some mini-series coming up that's going to be just absolutely phenomenal coming in March. I'm really excited about that too. So you're going to need to be a supporter, though, to unlock all of that. So head down to the show notes, become a supporter now. It just takes a couple of minutes, or head to politicsguys.com/support. That's again, politicsguys.com/support. If you're not in a place to financially support the podcast right now, you can always email us at mail@politicsguys.com and we can get you set up. Also, just remember, if you have any other kinds of questions, you can also reach us at mail@politicsguys.com. It's always helpful if you'll subscribe, rate, and review the show. That means the world to us. The other thing that means the world to me is our executive producers, and they are incredible. And they are Wilmer Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, Jody Marie Miller, and Sean Fugit. We'll be back with a full episode this weekend, and I hope you'll join us then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,